It happened when I was driving along the highway, feeling pretty reckless. I wasn't buckled up, and to top it off, I'd forgotten my car documents at home after taking the car for a wash earlier that day. A complete disaster combo, right? I kept glancing nervously in the rearview mirror, praying I wouldn't cross paths with any cops. My heart was racing like I was in some low-budget action movie. Then, of course, it happened. I saw a car parked on the side of the road ahead. I tried to stay calm, but as I passed it, I saw the worst thing possible. Those flashing lights flicked on in my rearview mirror. You know that sinking feeling in your gut? Yeah, that hit me hard. No way I was gonna play it cool now. So I pulled over immediately, hands on the wheel, waiting for the inevitable. Honestly, I was already mentally preparing to get roasted for the belt, the documents, everything. I had no idea that this encounter was about to flip my entire world upside down. An officer approached my car, and Dan, let me tell you, this guy was like something out of a movie. Tall, built like a tank, and that uniform hugged his body in all the right places. His arms? Absolute perfection. Thick, muscular, and those hands. I couldn't stop staring. He smelled incredible, like some expensive cologne, with just enough spice and masculinity to drive me crazy. When I glanced at his badge, it read Officer Clark. I was trying so hard not to gawk, but it wasn't easy. He leaned down to my window and in this deep, commanding voice, told me he'd seen me driving without a seatbelt. Then, of course, he asked for my documents. My heart was pounding, and not just because I knew I was screwed. I stammered out that I'd forgotten them, and he gave me this stern look that sent shivers down my spine. He asked me to step out of the car, and I obeyed without a second thought. Now, I know what you're thinking, routine search, right? Yeah, it started out that way. But the moment his hands touched me, everything changed. He began patting me down, starting at my waist, and his touch was firm, but somehow electric. His hands moved to my back, and I felt like I was on fire. When he slid his hands lower, down to my hips, I couldn't help but let out a tiny, involuntary gasp. I tried to play it cool, but inside, I was losing it. He paused for a second, maybe noticing my reaction, but then he continued, running his hands down to my ankles. And then, oh my God, he went back up. His hands roamed over my hips again, slower this time, and I swear I almost moaned. I bit my lip hard, trying to keep it together. Is this really necessary? I managed to ask, my voice shaking a bit. It's protocol, he replied, his tone neutral, but I could swear there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Then his hands moved higher, and well, let's just say he found out pretty quickly how excited I was. His palm lingered there, open, pressing against me just enough to make me shiver. I swear, I was on the verge of losing control right there on the side of the road. So there I was, standing by the side of the road, heart pounding, watching this absolute unit of a man step out of his patrol car. Officer Clark. Just saying his name in my head felt intense. He walked over with this confident stride, his boots crunching on the gravel, and I swear time slowed down. I could feel every beat of my heart echoing in my chest. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Tall, broad shoulders, muscles stretching that uniform like it was custom-made just for him. His short, dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his jawline, sharp enough to cut glass. And that scent, God, that scent. A mix of some expensive men's cologne and pure testosterone. He smelled like trouble, the good kind. He leaned down to my window, his eyes locking onto mine. I tried not to get lost in them, but they had this intense, no-nonsense energy. You were driving without a seatbelt, he said, his voice deep and authoritative. Just hearing him speak sent a shiver down my spine. Then he asked for my documents. I knew I was screwed. I forgot them, I stammered, feeling like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. He didn't say anything for a moment, just gave me this look, and I couldn't tell if it was disappointment or something else. Then he motioned for me to get out of the car. I obeyed instantly, nerves buzzing under my skin. Standing there, with the highway stretching out behind us and cars whizzing by, I couldn't help but feel completely vulnerable. He told me he needed to perform a routine search, and I nodded, trying to play it cool. But the second his hands touched me, I knew I was in trouble. He started at my waist, his hands firm and methodical. I tried to focus on the sky, the road, anything but him. But it was impossible. His hands were big, strong, and they moved with this deliberate precision that made it hard to breathe. When he slid his palms down to my lower back, my muscles tensed involuntarily. It was like every nerve in my body was on high alert. Then he moved lower, his hands tracing down my hips, and I couldn't help it. I let out this tiny, involuntary gasp. My face burned with embarrassment, but I couldn't help how my body reacted. He paused for a split second, like he'd noticed, then continued, sliding his hands down my legs, all the way to my ankles. I held my breath, trying to stay still, but my heart was racing. Just when I thought it was over, he straightened up and ran his hands back up my legs, slower this time. When he reached my hips again, his fingers pressed a little harder, lingering just a bit longer. I swear, I almost moaned right there. My whole body felt like it was on fire. Is this really necessary? I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't miss a beat. It's protocol, he said, his voice calm, but there was something in the way he looked at me, something I couldn't quite read. Then his hands moved higher. His palm brushed over, well, you know. My Jimmy wasn't exactly subtle about how I was feeling. His hand lingered open, pressing just enough to make my breath hitch. I could feel the heat rising in my face, but I couldn't hide the way my body reacted. His touch was firm, deliberate, and I swear he knew exactly what he was doing. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. Just the two of us, standing on the side of the highway, the air thick with tension. I bit my lip, trying to stay composed, but I was losing the battle. His hand moved slowly, almost teasingly, and I was on the verge of losing control. I don't know how long it lasted, probably only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When he finally stepped back, I could barely breathe. My whole body was buzzing, every nerve on fire, and I couldn't stop thinking about those hands, that scent, and the way he'd looked at me. So, after that intense inspection, Officer Clark finally stepped back. I was trying to catch my breath, my heart still pounding like crazy. He gave me this once-over, his eyes lingering for just a moment before he spoke again. "Everything's clear," he said, his voice steady, but I swear I caught a hint of something, maybe amusement, maybe curiosity. "Just need your passport so I can issue the fine," he added, pulling out his tablet. My hands were shaking as I fumbled to get it out, and I could barely focus on what he was saying. The whole time, my mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about his hands, the way they felt on my body, the way he'd, well, you know. I was ready to jump him right there on the side of the road, consequences be damned. While he was tapping away on his tablet, I couldn't hold back any longer. I blurted out, "Are you alone by any chance?" My voice was shaky, and I knew I probably sounded ridiculous, but I couldn't help it. I was burning up inside. He paused, a slow grin spreading across his face. "For a handsome guy like you," he said, his voice low and teasing. "I'm always alone." I felt my face flush, and I probably looked like a tomato. I couldn't believe I'd actually said that out loud, and his response. I was about ready to melt into the ground. He handed me my passport back, his fingers brushing mine for just a second longer than necessary. "Drive safe," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, and then he turned and walked back to his car. I stood there for a moment, watching him go, my mind spinning. I couldn't even bring myself to ask for his number. I was too flustered, too overwhelmed. I got back into my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and just sat there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. As I drove off, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. The way he touched me, the way he'd looked at me. I was practically vibrating with excitement. It was the most intense encounter of my life, and I couldn't stop thinking about him. About those hands. That scent. That voice. For the next couple of days, it was all I could think about. I'd lie in bed at night, replaying every second, wondering what would have happened if I'd just said something more. If I'd asked for his number, or if he'd maybe felt the same pull I did. I couldn't get him out of my head. And then, just when I thought it was all going to drive me crazy, something incredible happened. That weekend, I couldn't get Clark out of my head. I was restless, replaying our encounter like some scene from a movie. I needed to clear my mind, so I decided to hit up my favorite cafe, mostly to distract myself with some donuts and coffee. It was my go-to spot, this small, cozy place where I'd been going for years. I walked in, and my heart nearly stopped. Sitting at a corner table, casually sipping coffee and eating a donut, was Officer Clark. No uniform this time, just a fitted jacket over a plain white tee. And let me tell you, seeing him out of that uniform did something to me. The man was pure sex appeal, even in casual clothes. The jacket hugged his broad shoulders, and I couldn't decide which look I liked better, this laid-back version or the authoritative officer I'd met on the highway. He hadn't seen me yet. I stood there for a second, frozen, wondering if I should just leave. But my legs had a mind of their own. I sat down at a table nearby, trying to act natural. He was facing slightly away from me, focused on his phone, so I took a moment to just take him in. The way his fingers wrapped around the coffee cup, the way his jaw flexed when he chewed. It was ridiculous how attractive he was. I couldn't sit there quietly for long. My heart was pounding, and I knew I had to say something. So I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked over to his table. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Remember me?" He looked up, squinting for a second, and then a slow, teasing grin spread across his face. "Oh, I remember," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The scoundrel who seduced me during a traffic stop." I could feel my face heating up. "That wasn't." "I didn't. You were the one doing the searching," I shut back, trying to sound confident, but my voice betrayed me. He chuckled, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "You didn't exactly complain, did you?" I couldn't help but laugh, and just like that, the tension eased a little. I felt like I could breathe again. We ended up talking about everything and nothing. Turns out he had a sharp sense of humor, and beneath that tough exterior, he was surprisingly easy to talk to. By the time we left the cafe, the sun was starting to set. I don't even remember how it happened, but we ended up at a bar downtown, sharing drinks and stories. The more we drank, the more relaxed he got. At one point, he leaned in, his voice low and a little rough. "You know," he said, "I liked you right away, back on the highway. But I couldn't show it. Not while I was on duty." I stared at him, my heart doing somersaults. I liked you too," I admitted. "I haven't stopped thinking about it." And here Clark asked me to go to the bar down the street. I accepted. When we were drunk enough, Clark said that we need to go to the right place. He smiled, this slow, almost predatory smile, and I knew I was in trouble. "Maybe we should do something about that," he said, his voice dropping even lower. I swallowed hard. "We need to be alone." He didn't hesitate. "Let's go to my place." We didn't waste any time. The moment we left the bar, there was this unspoken urgency between us, a pull that neither of us could resist. The ride to his place felt like a blur, every second stretching out, the tension thick and electric. My mind was racing, my body already aching with anticipation. I kept stealing glances at him, taking in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands gripped the wheel. His presence was magnetic, overwhelming in the best way. When we finally arrived, the door had barely clicked shut before we were on each other. It was like a dam had broken, all the restrained desire from the past few days crushing over us. His lips were on mine, hot and demanding, his hands gripping my waist with an intensity that made my knees weak. He tasted like whiskey and heat, his scent intoxicating, wrapping around me like a fog. He pushed me back against the door, his body pressing into mine, strong and unyielding. His breath was hot against my neck, sending shivers down my spine. The sheer force of him, the way his body dominated mine, made me feel small in the best way. I was completely at his mercy, and I loved it. His hands slid down my sides, fingers curling into the fabric of my shirt, pulling it up and off in one smooth motion. My skin felt hypersensitive, every touch sending sparks shooting through me. Without warning, he spun me around, pressing my chest against the door. His voice, low and rough, whispered something about needing to search me again. My pulse skyrocketed. His hands were on me again, rougher this time, his palms trailing down my back, tracing the line of my spine. He unbuttoned my jeans, sliding them down, his fingers brushing against my skin with just enough pressure to drive me wild. His touch was electric, each movement deliberate and intense. I could barely breathe. My heart was pounding, every nerve in my body on high alert. His hands roamed over me, exploring, possessing. It was a mix of dominance and tenderness, his strength undeniable, yet there was a carefulness in his movements, a controlled ferocity. When his hands finally moved lower, I couldn't help but let out a shaky breath, my body arching into his touch. Every second felt stretched out, every touch searing into my skin. He didn't rush. His hands mapped out every inch of me, exploring, claiming. I was completely at his mercy, and I wanted more. My body was on fire, every touch sending waves of pleasure crashing over me. The sheer intensity of it, the way he controlled every moment, left me dizzy. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck, hot and ragged, and it only added to the heat pooling in my stomach. When he finally turned me around, his eyes were blue, intense, filled with something primal. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His hands were on me again, lifting me, guiding me towards the sofa. We barely made it before we were tangled together, bodies pressing, hands exploring. His weight pressed down on me, a delicious pressure that made me feel anchored, grounded. Every touch was a mix of strength and gentleness, his fingers trailing over my skin, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. He kissed me again, deeper this time, his hands moving with a surety that left me breathless. There was an intensity to it, a hunger that matched my own. His body was solid, his muscles tense beneath my hands. I ran my fingers over his back, feeling the strength there, the raw power that made me shiver. His hands were everywhere, exploring, tasing, driving me to the edge and pulling me back again. The room felt charged, every movement filled with a tension that bordered on explosive. It was raw, intense, a collision of need and desire. His touch was firm, his hands possessive, yet there was a tenderness to it, a careful control that made my head spin. He knew exactly what he was doing, every touch calculated, every movement deliberate. It was overwhelming in the best way. A sensory overload that left me gasping, clinging to him, completely lost in the moment. He kissed me hard, and damn, it felt like he was claiming me right there. His hands were all over me, rough and firm, pulling me in like he couldn't get enough. His mouth was on my neck, my chest, leaving a trail of heat. I ran my hands over his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. He was holding back, I could tell, but just barely. That control he had, it was intense. We didn't stop. It felt like hours, this push and pull, this intense, almost overwhelming connection. I was lost in it, in him. His body, his touch, the way he made me feel, it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. As things started to heat up, I could feel him moving faster, his body against mine, every thrust more urgent than the last. The air between us was thick with heat, and I was completely caught up in it. The way his hands gripped my hips, the way he guided me, it was all so overwhelming. My body was pressed against the fabric of the sofa, my knuckles digging into the cushion as I braced myself. I was lost in the sensations, feeling every movement, every shift of his body against mine. The sound of his breath was deep and ragged, and I could hear the soft, rhythmic sound of his groan against me, adding to the intensity of the moment. It wasn't just physical, it was this powerful, raw energy between us that made everything feel so charged. I could feel how close he was, his breathing getting quicker, more frantic, and it sent a rush of excitement through me. The anticipation of what was coming next, the way he was so in tune with my body, made my heart race. In that moment, I was just so in tune with him, with the way his hands moved over me, the way his body pressed into mine. It was like everything else faded away, and there was nothing but us. And when I felt how close he was to the edge, it was this electrifying moment, a kind of intense connection that left me breathless. It made everything feel so much more intense, like the build-up had reached this peak, and we were both holding on, not wanting it to end. It was like I couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything else but that connection, the heat of it, the way he seemed to know exactly what I needed. Every movement, every touch was deliberate, and it was all building towards something that felt inevitable, like we were both on the edge of something huge. It was a release, but also something deeper, something that made my body and mind hum in a way I couldn't quite describe. The whole thing left me feeling completely drained, but also more connected to him than I'd ever expected. The intensity of it all, everything that had led up to this moment, had felt so much more than physical. It was a kind of bond, something that we shared without words, something that had clicked between us. Even afterward, as we lay there, still catching our breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. When it was finally over, I was spent, my body trembling, my mind reeling. We lay there, tangled together on the sofa, his body warm and solid against mine. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and cologne, the room silent except for the sound of our ragged breathing. I could feel his heart pounding beneath my hand, his chest rising and falling in time with mine. It felt surreal. I closed my eyes, breathing him in, every muscle in my body still humming with the aftershocks of what we'd just shared. This wasn't just a one-time thing, I knew that much. There was something there, something intense and undeniable, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The next morning, I woke up to Clark shifting beside me, his arm lazily draped over my waist. The soft rise and fall of his breath tickled my shoulder, and for a moment, I just lay there, letting the warmth of the morning settle over us. He stirred, stretching slightly, and I could feel his gaze on me before I turned over to meet it. There was a soft, lingering smile on his face, one of those expressions that made it clear he was still processing everything. He seemed thoughtful, almost amused in a quiet way. After a moment, he sat up slightly, his hand brushing against mine. There was an energy in the air, one that felt both familiar and entirely new. It was like he was re-evaluating me in a way that caught me completely off guard. It didn't take much to understand what he was thinking, though. His expression softened, and there was this look of curiosity mixed with a kind of quiet appreciation. He didn't have to say anything for me to get it. He was replaying the night in his mind, and I could tell it had left a mark on him. He made it clear in his way, through small touches and lingering glances, that he hadn't expected it to feel so. Good. This wasn't about technique or experience. There was something deeper in the way he reached out for me, as though he couldn't quite believe the connection we'd shared. Later that morning, when we finally got out of bed, we both ended up heading to the shower. It was one of those moments that wasn't planned, but the pull between us made it inevitable. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and cologne, the room silent except for the sound of our ragged breathing. I could feel his heart pounding beneath my hand, his chest rising and falling in time with mine. It felt surreal. I closed my eyes, breathing him in, every muscle in my body still humming with the aftershocks of what we'd just shared. This wasn't just a one-time thing, I knew that much. There was something there, something intense and undeniable, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The next morning, I woke up to Clark shifting beside me, his arm lazily draped over my waist. The soft rise and fall of his breath tickled my shoulder, and for a moment, I just lay there, letting the warmth of the morning settle over us. He stirred, stretching slightly, and I could feel his gaze on me before I turned over to meet it. There was a soft, lingering smile on his face, one of those expressions that made it clear he was still processing everything. He seemed thoughtful, almost amused in a quiet way. After a moment, he sat up slightly, his hand brushing against mine. There was an energy in the air, one that felt both familiar and entirely new. It was like he was re-evaluating me in a way that caught me completely off guard. It didn't take much to understand what he was thinking, though. His expression softened, and there was this look of curiosity mixed with a kind of quiet appreciation. He didn't have to say anything for me to get it. He was replaying the night in his mind, and I could tell it had left a mark on him. He made it clear in his way, through small touches and lingering glances, that he hadn't expected it to feel so. Good. This wasn't about technique or experience. There was something deeper in the way he reached out for me, as though he couldn't quite believe the connection we'd shared. Later that morning, when we finally got out of bed, we both ended up heading to the shower. It was one of those moments that wasn't planned, but the pull between us made it inevitable. The warmth of the water and the confined space seemed to heighten everything. The sound of the water cascading, the steamy air, the closeness of our skin brushing against each other. The water ran over us, warm and steady, making everything feel softer, closer. My hands naturally found their way to his body, roaming over his shoulders and chest, feeling the firmness of his muscles under my fingertips. His skin was smooth and warm, slick from the water, and every movement felt so natural, like I was meant to. We started seeing each other in secret after that night. At first, it was a little awkward, with nervous glances and trying to figure out how to act when we were alone versus around other people. But after a while, that awkwardness faded. We got more comfortable, and the embarrassment we had in the beginning just sort of disappeared. Clark stopped overthinking everything, and I think he finally let himself enjoy it without all the guilt or second guessing. He accepted it. He accepted me. I was his secret, sure, but I could tell he didn't see it as just some fling or something meaningless. We didn't talk about it like that, but I could feel it in the way he was with me. He wasn't just doing something on the side. There was more to it. I could tell when we were together how much he wanted it, how much he wanted me. What he did do to me in bed. Guys, I'm with you to find the same guy. He's a real beast. One time, I told him about this idea I'd been holding onto for a while. I'd asked if we could recreate how we first met with him in his police uniform. It wasn't anything too wild. I just thought it'd be hot, and it felt kind of meaningful, like going full circle back to the start. But he shut it down pretty quick. He wasn't angry or anything, just firm. He said no, and I could tell it wasn't up for debate. He respected the uniform too much and his job as a police officer, and it wasn't something he'd mess with. I respected that, even if I was a little disappointed. That was Clark, though. Always serious about what he stood for, even if it meant saying no to something he probably wanted to. One day, Clark surprised me. We'd been meeting in secret for a while at that point, and I thought I had a pretty good idea of what he was comfortable with and what he wasn't. But out of nowhere, he agreed to something I honestly never thought he'd go for. He offered to use the handcuffs. It wasn't some big dramatic lead-up. We were just alone, hanging out, and things started to heat up the way they always did when we had time to ourselves. It was one of those nights where the energy between us felt different, more charged, maybe. He'd been playful all evening, teasing me in little ways, like running his hands over my back or pulling me closer just to let go again. It felt like he was testing me, building something up. Then, as things were escalating, he stepped away for a second. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was always careful, always measured, and I figured he just needed a moment to collect himself. But when he came back, he had the cuffs in his hand. I froze for a second, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. I could tell he was serious because of the way he looked at me. There was no hesitation in his expression, just this calm confidence that told me he'd thought it through. He didn't say much. Clark wasn't really the type to talk things to death when actions spoke louder, but the way he held them out to me was enough. He wasn't just tasing, he was offering. I didn't even know what to say. It felt surreal, like something out of a daydream I never expected to come true. I just nodded, and before I knew it, he was guiding me over to the bed. The cuffs were cool against my wrists as he fastened them, and the sound of the metal clicking into place sent this weird mix of anticipation and nervousness through me. Not in a bad way, it was just the intensity of the moment. Clark was calm and deliberate, his hands steady as he made sure they weren't too tight. He wasn't just doing this to be hot. He was being careful, making sure I was okay with every step. When he finally stepped back to look at me, his expression changed. There was this intensity in his eyes I hadn't seen before, like the usual lines between us had shifted, and he was fully leaning into the moment. I was completely at his mercy, and instead of feeling nervous, it felt good, like I could trust him completely, no matter what. He didn't rush anything. That was one of the things about Clark. He always knew how to pace things perfectly. He let his hands roam over me, starting with my shoulders and working his way down, taking his time to explore every part of me like he was memorizing it. The cuffs only heightened everything. Knowing I couldn't move, that I was entirely under his control, made every touch feel amplified. His lips followed his hands, brushing against my skin in a way that was soft at first, then more deliberate. He knew exactly what he was doing, and the way he teased me with just enough to leave me wanting more drove me insane in the best way. The whole time, I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was so focused, so in control, and seeing him like that was breathtaking. There was something about the way he carried himself in that moment, confident, assured, completely in his element, that made me feel like the luckiest person alive. Clark was careful, taking his time. He didn't rush anything. His lips brushed gently against my skin at first, soft and tasing, like he was savoring every second. His movements were slow, deliberate, and I couldn't help but notice how he seemed to be paying attention to every little detail, as though he was trying to read me, make sure I was okay, make sure it felt right. I could feel his warmth against my skin as he moved lower, his hands never far from me, ensuring that I was comfortable at every step. As his lips moved further down, a mix of anticipation and excitement built inside me. Every soft kiss, every light caress, had my body reacting in ways I didn't expect. I couldn't stay still. I squirmed a little, the pressure of the situation and his touch making everything feel intense. My body started to tremble. The sensations were overwhelming in the best way. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be silent or if it was okay to make a sound, but as he reached further, I couldn't help it. I let out a soft groan, my body reacting to the way his touch made me feel. Clark didn't pull away or rush. He kept his pace steady, his hands gentle but firm as he guided me through it, holding me in place when I tried to shift. His fingers gripped my sides, keeping me steady, making sure I felt safe even as I felt so exposed. It was this mixture of helplessness and security that made everything feel so perfect. I wasn't in control, and honestly, I didn't want to be. The trust I had in him, the way he made me feel cared for even as I let go, made all the difference. As things built up, my body kept responding, and I had to let go. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. The sensation of his touch, his hands, his lips, it all felt so right. Every movement he made seemed to bring me closer to the edge, but he never once made me feel like I was out of control. It was the gentleness of his hands, the way he held me steady, the way he made sure I was still comfortable even when I was trembling with the intensity of it all. In that moment, I realized that being helpless wasn't a bad thing, it was freeing. I didn't need to worry about anything else because I trusted him completely. It was just me, Clark, and this moment where we both gave ourselves to something real. After everything had calmed down for a moment, Clark moved, and I could feel him shift behind me. He unhooked me from the position we were in. My body was still buzzing with the aftermath of what had just happened, but there was this sense that things were only getting started. He turned me around gently, like he was being careful but still commanding. I was a bit disoriented from how intense the last few minutes had been, but he didn't give me time to think. His hands were on me again, and this time, it felt like everything had heightened, the energy, the connection, the tension. And he did to me what he did in our first night. As he continued, I could feel how much more relaxed we both were this time, how much more comfortable with each other. The anticipation that had been there earlier had shifted into something more steady, more natural. The way his body pressed against mine, the way we fit together, it was like everything had fallen into place. Every movement, every shift felt so much more deliberate, and it made everything feel so much more satisfying. I could hear his breath again, slow and deep, just like before. The rhythm of his breathing matched the pace we set together, and I could feel every breath he took against my skin. There was this almost magnetic pull between us, like we couldn't stay apart for too long, like we were always drawn back to each other. What really struck me was how much more in tune we were now. I didn't feel any hesitation this time. Everything was smooth, almost like we were made for this moment. It was a kind of harmony I hadn't expected, and that's what made it even more enjoyable. The pace was perfect, each move syncing perfectly with the other. The initial uncertainty was gone, replaced by this deeper, quieter connection. The pleasure from the first time hadn't faded. In fact, it only intensified. It was the kind of feeling that built up slowly, starting as this low, smoldering warmth that spread through my body, getting stronger with each touch. With each shift, I could feel it building, like this slow burn that was just getting hotter. I didn't want it to end, didn't want the moment to slip away. And then, as things started to heat up again, the feelings I'd been trying to ignore crept up on me again. The physical pleasure was undeniable, but there was something else, something deeper. I could feel the weight of his body behind me, the strength in his hands, and the connection between us that felt even more intimate now. We were so much more in sync than the first time, and that made everything feel even better. It wasn't just about the touches, the rhythm. It was the way we were both fully present with each other. No distractions, no rush, just pure connection. When we finally both reached the peak, everything seemed to shudder to a halt, like the world had stopped, and all that was left was the two of us, breathing heavily, tangled together. We were both silent for a moment, just catching our breath, but there was no awkwardness this time. It was just a quiet understanding between us, like we had crossed into a new space together. It was wild how the second time felt even more intense than the first. I hadn't expected it, but now I couldn't wait for the next time we'd be together. I knew that we had something that went beyond just the physical. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be ignored. It's amazing how life can take such unexpected turns, sometimes leading you down a path you never thought you'd walk. For me, it all started that day on the side of the road when I didn't buckle up, and everything has changed since then. I remember that moment, the adrenaline from the situation, and how my whole world flipped. I had no idea back then that the handsome officer in front of me would become such a central part of my life, but here I am now, looking back and realizing how that one small decision altered everything. Clark and I had been meeting in secret for a while, navigating the complexities of his job as an officer and the boundaries that his profession placed on our relationship. It wasn't easy, especially in the beginning. We had to be careful, sneaking around, finding moments when he wasn't on duty or when I had some time off from my office job. It was like we were living in two different worlds, his full of rules and structure, mine a bit more flexible, but still bound by my own responsibilities. But even in the midst of the secrecy, the connection between us was undeniable. Every time we saw each other, it felt like a little slice of freedom, like we were getting away with something exciting, but it also left me craving more. We spent weekends together mostly, those rare moments when our schedules lined up, when he was off duty and I could get away from my desk. Those weekends were always filled with excitement, not just for the obvious reason, but because we didn't have to worry about anything else for a few days. But as the weeks passed, we began to talk about the future. We both realized that we couldn't keep living like this forever. The secrecy was wearing on us, and while the thrill of sneaking around was exciting at times, it was also exhausting. We both wanted more, and deep down, we knew we had something real, something worth building on. Clark had always been cautious about his job, the way it dictated so much of his life. He had always kept his personal life separate from his work, and I understood why. Being an officer meant living with certain expectations, being under constant scrutiny. But the more we got to know each other, the more we realized that we both wanted to be able to share our lives openly. We wanted to be able to go out together without looking over our shoulders, to live without the constant fear of someone finding out. So one evening, after a few drinks and a lot of talking, we decided to take the plunge. We made plans to move in together. The idea of living together was something that had been floating in my mind for a while, but I hadn't dared to bring it up. It seemed like a far-off dream, something that might never happen given our current circumstances. But now that we had finally talked about it, I couldn't help but feel this wave of excitement wash over me. We were going to build a life together, and I couldn't wait to see what that would look like. The thought of living with Clark every day made my heart race. I envisioned us waking up together in the same bed, sharing breakfast, and just being around each other more. I fantasized about our daily routines, like how we would have our first coffee of the day, maybe taking a walk with a dog, something we had discussed a few times. I imagined getting a dog, something simple but meaningful, as a sign of the life we would build. A companion for us both, a little piece of joy in our lives. It felt like it was all falling into place, like we were finally moving forward into a future that felt real and right. But it wasn't just about the future, it was about the present too. The intimacy we shared had only grown deeper over time. It was more than just great sex. It was a bond that went beyond the physical. But of course, the physical side of things was still incredible. In fact, I found myself more and more eager to take the lead when we were together. At first, I had been hesitant, unsure of myself and unsure of how Clark would react. But over time, I became more confident. I realized that I didn't always have to wait for him to make the first move. It was a far cry from where we started. I remembered the first time he had pulled me over, when all I could think about was how he made me feel, the way his touch had set something off inside me. But now, everything felt so much deeper, more meaningful. It wasn't just a spark anymore, it was a steady flame that had been growing steadily. Our relationship was no longer just about stolen moments. It was about building something together, something that wasn't just based on desire or attraction, but on trust, respect, and love. We talked about opening up our relationship too, not because we didn't want each other, but because we knew that we had to make room for the possibility of other experiences. We had both spent a lot of time thinking about what we wanted, and it wasn't about being exclusive in the way most people think of it, it was about freedom. We wanted to explore, to experience new things, but still keep the bond between us solid. We talked about it openly, honestly, with no fear of judgment. And that's when I realized just how much we had grown, both individually and together. And our Stex. I've already said that, but he's the best man in my life. He's strong and sensual at the same time. I have the best Stex in my life.